lit review, explanation and methods, our results, our conclusions, and finally our Q&A. So hopefully around 5 minutes for each section. So I'll get started with the introduction. Most of us here are probably aware of what Duolingo is, even if we're not familiar with it. It's a language learning app which is readily available on smartphones, tablets, and on desktops. And we wanted to research about this, especially these two questions. Number one, how effective is Duolingo in developing L2 acquisition in English language learners in a Japanese university context? And number two, what are the experiences of students using Duolingo to study English? So why did we choose Duolingo? Well, first of all, it's free, which is a clear benefit for everybody involved. Secondly, Sian and I are both fairly familiar with Duolingo, as we both use it as part of our own Japanese language studies. It's fairly easy to use. It's got a very user-friendly interface, very intuitive controls. The gamification aspects of it is also very appealing for many language learners. And the Duolingo for Schools part of the website is also very useful for tracking and collecting the students' study data, amongst other things. So a very brief history of Duolingo. It's been around for 10 years now. It started in 2011. It's based on a grammar translation and conscious learning method. And their mission statement, which is lovely, is to make language learning personalized, fun, accessible, and also free. So there is a lot of, there is a growing amount of studies out there on Duolingo that we have read. But one of the main ones is this 2012 study by Vasilinov and Grego, which Duolingo use to advertise themselves. And they suggest that 34 hours of Duolingo could be equal to 1 university semester's worth of language learning, which is a bold claim, of course. And actually, this particular study was sponsored by Duolingo. So read into that what you will. So just to kind of sum up the introduction and lit review, there's definitely some pros and cons associated with the Duolingo app. It's good for learning different writing systems. It's good for lower level learners. But some of the cons, maybe, you're not going to become conversationally fluent. There's definitely a lack of non-verbals, and also there's some downsides to the gamification aspect. So we're going to move on to our methods now with Sian.
Okay. So I'll explain what we did with our study. At first, I'd like to say that it was a very small study. We were doing this during the coronavirus pandemic of last year. So we invited many students to take part, but we only had a few in the end. So the first thing we did is we gave the students some questionnaires just to ascertain their language level, and also how often and how much they studied in university and also outside of university. Then we asked the students to take a Duolingo English test. Now that's slightly different to the Duolingo app. I'll be explaining that shortly, okay? After that, we split the students into 2 groups, the control group and the experimental group. So the control group just continued with their university studies as usual. They did their homework. They didn't do anything extra. The experimental group started using Duolingo. So we encouraged the students to use Duolingo for a minimum of 30 minutes per week. And we also encouraged them to try to use it every day where possible. Now, some of the students just did the basic minimum, and some of them quite enjoyed it and they did a lot more. So we did this for 8 weeks, and after that we asked the students to take the Duolingo English test again so that we could compare their pre-test and their post-test to see if there was any difference in their level. And we also asked students to fill out post questionnaires to explain their experiences of Duolingo. So a little bit about our participants. We only had 8 students in the end, 6 female and 2 male. They were aged between 18 to 20. They were all English majors, and they did volunteer. At the end, we had a control group of 3 students and an experimental group of 5 students. So we used the Duolingo English test. It seemed to make sense as we were testing the Duolingo app. It's also quite a convenient test. It's available online and on demand. It only takes about an hour to do. And we needed to find out the students' English proficiency before and after our study. So this seemed quite a convenient thing to do. We're actually presenting about this test later on today in the posters session if you want to ask us more about this test. Okay. So with the Duolingo English test, you can get results within 48 hours. And they give you an overall language level score, and they also break that down into sub-scores of literacy, conversation, comprehension, and production. So you can get quite a nuanced results about students' levels. Okay. And this shows how the Duolingo matches up with other popular proficiency tests. Okay, I'm going to hand you over to Jay now to explain some of our results.
Okay, thank you, Sian. So in our pre-questionnaire, we were kind of lucky, I guess, that none of the students had used Duolingo before, so we could proceed with the study. But on the screen, you can see some examples of other apps that they used to study English. So some of them might be familiar to you guys. And of course, we did inquire about some of their English usage outside of classroom, how many English classes they take a week. Being English majors, there was quite a lot of things that they did, you know, YouTubing, movies, music, etc., with an average of 6 English classes a week. So onto the pre-test scores. So the overall score, this is using the Duolingo English test. Students A, B, and C are from the control group, and students D through to H are for the experimental group. So a fairly broad range of scores there. And this next table shows the breakdown scores, so the literacy, conversation, comprehension, and production scores of each student. As you can see, most of them are much better at literacy and comprehension compared to conversation and particularly production. So what did we expect? We expected there to be some gains as they are studying English fairly hardcore, being English majors. We expected there might be a slight improvement in the experimental group, but we weren't sure how significant that might be. And we also thought there would be maybe some correlation between their study habits and their potential language gains. So let's have a look. This is the post-study test scores. So again, ABC is the control, D through to H are the experimental group. And there was in general some gains. 6 out of 8 improved. One of them had the same score and one of them dropped down slightly. So you can see the comparison here. The top right is the post-study and the bottom left is the pre-study scores. So yeah, a few gains. And you can also see this reflected in the breakdown scores. when we try to visualize it like this in graph form, it's not so easy to see the comparisons. There's kind of a lot going on here, actually. But most of the students did improve in most of the categories, which you can see maybe a bit easy here when we tabulated the data and calculated the means, the mean improvement within each group. So again, the participants here, A, B, and C, is the control group, and D through to H is the experimental group. So we can see that there is actually a bigger gain in all the students in the experimental group compared to the control group. Not huge, but noticeable, which, you know, if we visualize it, it's fairly easy to see the difference. And again, here in the breakdown scores, the experimental group improved more than the control group in every category. So I think Sian's going to talk about the students' feelings on Duolingo.
Okay, so post-test, we also gave the students another questionnaire for the experimental group, just to see their feelings about using Duolingo to regularly study. And they, our study was 8 weeks long, so they knew it quite well by the end. So as you can see here, the majority of students, just about the majority, did enjoy using the Duolingo app. And then a few, 40% of the students, I think, didn't have strong feelings about it either way. But overall, they seemed quite a little positive about using it. Okay, and I think the students' likes and dislikes and their comments tell us a lot about what they thought. So what did you particularly enjoy about using Duolingo? I think they quite liked the game style of study, and they enjoyed the production and the speaking part of it. They also enjoyed the league system and competing with learners from all over the world. There were some also negative comments about using Duolingo. I cannot study the difficult English words. The vocabulary was easy. The same question came up many times. Questions are a little easier. So while they did overall seem to enjoy using it, I think our students thought it was slightly easy, and that's because we feel the people who volunteered for our study were actually sort of higher level students. And from our research, we and the research concludes that Duolingo is actually better for lower level students to sort of solidify basic grammar and basic English patterns. Okay, so moving on, about whether the students think Duolingo helped improve their language ability. Basically, most of the students agreed that it did help them, and a small percentage thought neither one way nor the other. They quite liked it because they could study the basics. It helped me study the English basics. Also, this was an interesting comment. It continued to study English every day. I think they all found that quite useful to get into that English habit. And small grammar mistakes had decreased. So for reviewing the basics, I think they thought it was useful and beneficial. Okay, and onto the students' study habits. We could see here how active the students were, how many days they actually studied, how many lessons they covered, and the course progress skills. Try as we might, we couldn't really find a correlation between sort of how many lessons they studied and actual gains in their English. But we did think this was an interesting thing, potentially for the future, to investigate further. Okay, conclusions and future implications. Okay, so back to our research questions. How effective is Duolingo in developing L2 acquisition in English language learners in a Japanese university context? So we did find that in general, in the experimental group, there was a language gain which was greater than in the control group. However, of course, at this point in time, because of the size of the case study, we're not able to tell at this moment if that's due to just chance or whether there was actual significant gains, okay? Only 8 students were in the study and only 5 actually used Duolingo. So that is one of the limitations of this current study. If we go back to the other one, that's great. What are the experiences of students using Duolingo to study English? In general, the students were very positive about study using Duolingo, particularly to review the basics and to create English study habits. So generally, they seemed fairly motivated and positive. So yeah, to move back to the challenges, I mentioned the case study size is too small. Also, we felt that the length of the study, which was 8 weeks, was also too short to see any significant improvement. So that was also a limitation. The Duolingo English test, we had a lot of issues with that. It had its positives without doubt, but it's actually quite hard to get tests verified and to get those results back. So that caused us a lot of trouble. So what we decided is, based on this case study, we decided to continue, and we've actually started a new study. We plan to reproduce what we've done, but actually on a much larger scale. We're currently doing the same study with 2 classes of students, and we're also doing it for a longer time, over 13 weeks this time. So we hope to be able to prove that the language gains were due to Duolingo and not just chance. Of course, and one other limitation of this study was we couldn't in detail or in depth study how much English the students were studying incidentally outside of their language courses, and that's quite hard to quantify. We would need students to keep English study diaries to understand in more detail how much other study they're doing outside of Duolingo and university. So that was another drawback that we hope to investigate in the future. Okay.
Yeah, that's it. So
okay.
references.
Yeah.
And yeah.
If you know Duolingo, perhaps you'll be aware of the Duolingo bird. Sometimes it does feel a bit like this. It does keep you studying. It's very motivating.
It's very
right?
persistent,
yes.
Isn't it? The notifications.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, so guys, hopefully we have a few minutes for some Q&A. So thank you very much, everybody.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so if anybody has any questions.
Yes, thank you very much for the wonderful presentation. I'd like to ask everyone to please unmute their microphones and give the presenters a round of applause. Or you can use the reaction as well, if that's preferable.
Thank you.
And we have many questions in the chat here. The first bit from Jen Numerante. Did the students have to pay for the tests themselves?
Very good question. No, they did not have to pay for the test themselves. We planned to get funding through our research budgets. However, we did run into a few issues with that of our own making. which would rather not talk about because it's a bit painful.
Yeah, it was trouble.
But yeah, so I mean, if you guys are thinking about using it, just be aware of that. Like, just make sure you clear it very thoroughly with your research office. Because yeah, in an ideal world, it wouldn't have been a problem, but we did have a few issues with that. Yeah.
So yeah, then I'll ask another question from the chat, and then I'll ask the audience for a live question as well after. So from Care Thomas, which elements of Duolingo are considered gamified? Also, were they using the website version of the app or the app version? Thanks.
Well, I think for website versus app, I think all of the students were using the app version. On they all had their smartphones, and despite letting them know that they can do it on their computer, I think it's fairly usual, right? Everyone just kind of migrates to their smartphone at for the ease and convenience, right? So yeah, and for the the second part was what gamification aspects.
There's sort of there's league tables, so you have to try and try and get XP points to sort of level up, and then you can get there's gems, right, that you can collect after you complete lessons, and you also level up depending on how many skills you've completed in one set of lessons. Yeah, there's various different things. Can you think of anything else?
Yeah, there's a bunch of different things, right? Yeah.
There's the little competition quizzes as well that you can actually take part in, and you've got to finish it within little time limits. Yeah, there's quite a few different things, and then you can buy things with the gems that you've gained, little outfits for the Duolingo owl.
Yeah, there's a surprisingly large number of gamification points. Like, you can take little challenges. Of course, there's the streak building, so continuing to study for a number of days in a row. But that is related to some of the negative points of the gamification as well. Like, sometimes people will just be like, oh, I need to keep my streak going, and they'll just study one of the easier lessons without really committing to learning.
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess maybe overall it's a more positive aspect, but there's definitely some negatives to it too.
Yeah.
So thank you very much for the very well elaborated answer. I think we have just enough time for one question left, if anyone in the audience would like to ask a question to our speakers today. Yes, Jennifer Igawa.
Thank you very much for your presentation. The last time I looked at Duolingo was about 3 years ago, and I noticed that there were lots of language errors, or at least very unnatural language. Right. And I wonder if, to your knowledge, there have been any improvements on that.
Yeah, as far as I'm aware, there are still some errors that come up. You know, it's all AI controlled, which means it is kind of always updating itself and improving. Certainly from 3 years ago, I'm sure it looks very different.
I've never noticed any errors, to be honest. Sometimes they have strange sentences in there, but I think that's part of the trying to keep the interest in there. Some you can, if you look on the internet, there's some funny sentences that came up on Duolingo, but they're grammatically correct. They're just weird, yeah.
Yeah,
unnatural.
Yeah, there might be some very strange collocations or whatever, but grammatically they are, for the most part, correct, and it is improving all the time, as I said, which is good.
Is there still that kind of you see, for example, the Japanese and the English, because there's a disconnect between them, I find.
Yeah, a lot of it is still very grammar translation based, which is, we can go into that debate a lot more, right? But
yes.
Yeah, and so that translation can be, difficult sometimes, but I think can be valuable in a way.
I think that particularly for lower level learners, I think these days it's fairly good. I think as the more complex the sentences get, then that becomes more of an issue, I would say.
Thank you.
But please check it out these days. I mean, I'm sure you'll notice yourself. I'm sure there have been, improvements.
I will. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, well, thank you very much, you two. It was a wonderful presentation, and I'll give you another round of applause. We'll have to move on to our next presentation.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, guys. And we're presenting about the Duolingo English test at 4 p.m. today, if anyone is interested. Cool. Ah, it's Jared. Hey, Jared. Bye, Jared.
Hey, how you going?
You all right?
Yeah. Good job.
Thanks, man. You're looking very relaxed.
Nice presentation.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks.
I missed the beginning. Did you actually show what Duolingo looks like in the beginning?
We did have a little bit at the beginning, yeah. Can we show you somehow now? Yeah, I could probably share.
Yeah, just for a second. That's actually what I really was interested in. I got caught up in a meeting.
Where is it?
Like
this is one screenshot of the kind of basic aspects of it. So the three kind of on the right have these kind of screenshots. So you can go, the second one is kind of shows how you kind of progress through the skills. And then the last one with the blue background is like a really simple example of one of the questions.
Okay.
But I mean, it has a lot of different question formats.
Got it.
So yeah, I mean, I don't think the students get too bored with it in terms of the question style, right? Maybe the level, they said it was a bit easy, but
okay. And can you track everything?
yeah. So the Duolingo schools website is really good, actually. You can create classrooms. You can share like a join code, so all the students can join it together. They can interact with each other as well within that classroom, like like each other's progress and all that stuff. And we can see like time stamped, when they studied each particular skill or lesson, how many XP points, etc., etc. So it's pretty detailed, actually.
I have my own website for language learning, and I'm looking to integrate more gamification. So it might be a good place to look.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely got a lot of things that you could draw upon. I'm sure. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what we definitely need to add more fun kind of game things like this. It's mostly just a reading website right now.
Okay.
Cool. Okay. Yeah. Thanks a lot.
Yeah. No worries. Thank you.
Worries.
Okay, I'll stop sharing that now.